Is America going broke, and what can we do about it? I just came back from Canada. I had my Canada t-shirt on. As many of you know, I have a split personality family. Half of it's Canadian, and my wife, Linda, and her family. I had a big get-together, so I was just up in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, having a visit with them. Of course, we got to hear a lot about their vision of what's going on the other side of the 48th parallel. Our Canadian relatives, by the way, are fine. Everything is great in Canada. They're happy, they're thriving, and as usual, they're full of opinions. So let me just say that they all read. In fact, my goddaughter is a library scientist, and there are a lot of great readers in Canada. And they're just reading Ray Dalio's new book. Now, if you don't know who Ray Dalio is, he started Bridgewater Fund. I think he's the third or fourth largest hedge fund manager in America. He's a great writer. He has a number of wonderful books I've mentioned to you before. I particularly like his book called Principles. It's a wonderful read. And his new book is called How Countries Go Broke. It's a very interesting read, but how does it affect us? And is it something you should worry about? And I don't think that it is a thing that you should be waking up in the middle of the night worrying. However, it is important to take action to protect yourself against things that might be happening in the future. You know, you hear the ads on television about impending financial crisis, and you should buy gold, and you should buy silver, and you should get 25-year food that's preserved, and you should have solar, generators and all this kind of stuff. Okay, that's a true prepper's approach to, the country crumbling in a disaster. I'm not in that camp. I would just tell you I'm not there. I do think that we have some issues, but I do think that as an individual, we can prepare ourselves for the ups and downs of the economy. Having run a financial practice for 50 years and being in the financial world for a long time, I have survived the, Black Monday 1987. I was there, and I was there for Y2K meltdown, and I was there on 9/11 day in the office watching the TV, and I was there for the Iraq War and Afghanistan, and all these different things. So we're strong. We're going to survive. However, let's not be foolish. Let's think about what we do to prepare ourselves for the things that are going on. Now, I will tell you, this comes from Ray Dalio's book, and it's about the debt crisis at critical max. And let me just quote what he says. I don't want to misquote him. And he says, if we're really looking over the next 3 years, or give or take a year or two, that we're in the type of critical situation right now. Now, what does that mean if America is in a debt crisis? Let's just explain it. It's similar to your own credit situation in your family. Where we are going with especially the current tax legislation that we have, or the one that's about to be passed or renewed or whatever, is that very shortly this year, that the cost of our debt in America will exceed the cost of paying for our security and our defense. Now how does that work? Let's say it's your family. Let's say that you've got a lot of credit card debt and it's high interest, which, by the way, in order to be free, you need to get your debt paid for. It's one of the first rules of being financially free is get rid of debt. If you haven't done it yet, let's say the next 3 years, that should be your focus. If you have debt, especially junk debt, I'm not talking about constructive debt, maybe on real estate. I'm talking about junk debt. Junk debts on cars, credit cards, stuff like that. You should get rid of it. But if your debt expense, let's say in your household, the amount you're paying for interest cost is so great, you can't afford medical insurance, life insurance, insurance in your home. Those are the protective things. In the government, we call that defense spending, right? Defense spending is like insurance on your safety, right? So if the cost of your interest is so great, you can't afford defense spending, you become a debtor nation. Now, right now, in Ray Dalio's book, he quotes this, and let me just say that the number one holder of credit debt for America is Japan, closely followed by China. Now, what does that mean? That means that the money that we float in bonds, the people that we pay interest to, are Japan and China. Now, it's very unhealthy, but that's the situation, is that we owe China a lot of money, and that means that we have to pay them every week, every month, just like you pay your credit card bills, a greater and greater amount of our income or our GDP, okay? Now, that's sort of point one. It's the reason why I want you all out there, if you're thinking about what may happen, to pay off all of your junk debt personally. It's the same thing that America is trying to do. The second thing is that recently, Moody's, that's the big bond rating service that rates all the bonds, a McDonald's bond, a Ford bond, an Amazon bond. They just reduced the financial strength rating of the American bonds. Okay, what does that mean? If you have a bad credit rating, and let's go back to your house. If you have a bad credit rating, you pay more interest for your car loan. If you have a bad credit rating, you pay a higher interest on your house loan. Okay? If America has a bad credit rating, we have to pay higher interest to get people to buy our bonds. So instead of getting away paying 3 or 4, now we're paying 5, 6, or 7% to sell bonds to Japan and China and other countries as well that we don't even know about. So because Moody's has reduced our rating, our interest cost is going to go up. Now, $1 trillion of debt is a lot of debt. And, if we're paying $800 billion a year, right, out to people, that's $800 billion that we can't spend on our own defense and taking care of our own senior citizens and Medicare and Medicaid and all that. So let's talk about what you can do. If in fact Ray Dalio and other people are right about this, and we are entering an era in America of debt crisis. By the way, we survived. My parents lived through the 20s, the great financial crash. We survived all that. We came out the other end of the Great Depression and poof, next thing we know, it was 1939, not 1929. And a little man named Hitler came along and we had a whole another crisis to pay for. Now, as it turns out, all that wartime manufacturing recharged the American economy, and we had an era of prosperity after World War II that was unprecedented because our factories were humming and we were making airplanes and we were cranking out new ships and everybody was working. And they call that guns and butter. When you have a war, it creates a lot of employment. A lot of employment is good for the population. And there's a reason why Eisenhower said that we should all be wary of the military-industrial complex, because the military wants you to build more things in the industrial complex. It does create jobs. However, what you're building essentially are giant hunks of steel that float in the water or airplanes that are flying around, which in 2025 is kind of like a retro defense system when the world is fighting with little drones, Okay, so let's go back to this. We have a little debt crisis going on in our house, in the House of America, and we have to get our credit sort of organized. So one thing we can do is to also increase our ownership of assets, okay? Because whether it's gold or silver, and the reason that people promote gold or silver, physical assets, is they're actually worried about the US dollar being worth less to the world. Now, I'm not overly worried about the strength of the US dollar, but I will say that as you're paying off debt, you should also look to increase your ownership of assets. And that means things like real estate, dividend paying stocks, other types of investments that are essentially not necessarily subject to the dramatic fluctuations of the market. Also, you should know that this generally leads to a period of inflation, but you got to use inflation to your benefit. How do you use inflation to your benefit? Well, it's really simple. If you look back at the last sort of 10 years, we had, a lifetime rate of inflation of 3.5%, and then all of a sudden it spiked after COVID into the 8 zone. Well, what happened when inflation spiked to the 8% zone? A lot of people complained, but a lot of people won. The market shot up like crazy. We had, during the last administration, 4 years with an 85% increase in the stock market. Why? Inflation makes the cost of goods and services go up. That is good for people who own stock. It's good for people who own real estate. Real estate had an unprecedented increase in value. So you need to own things that are positively affected by inflation. So if the price of food and gas goes up, but your stock portfolio goes up by 15%, you win, okay? You want to have your assets grow more than the cost of what you're paying for. That's how you win by fighting against inflation. I don't think that we're heading toward a 3-year crisis, but I do think we are heading for probably a 3-year change. According to Ray Dalio and the other financial experts, it takes a while. These things are what we call lagging indicators. When they pass a new bill and we start paying interest on the debt, or we increase our debt limit and all that stuff that's going on in politics, right? It takes like 3 years for it to actually get into the economic mechanics of how things turn out. So let's just take a look forward to 3 years from now. We want to get free of excess junk debt, especially debt that can go up with interest rate increases, okay? The second thing is we want to own more assets that are insulated from the problems of the U.S. economy and assets that are sort of disconnected from politics. This is one of the reasons why I recently did a video about protecting against Social Security changes. I do think if we run out of money and we can't fully fund Social Security, that you should have other sources of income that are not politically tied to anybody sitting in Washington that determines how much Social Security you should get. I think you want to have your own multiple sources of secure income. And I will tell you, the greatest asset that everybody has is right between their ears, and you can create a business on your own. It's a wonderful time to do it. If you're a full-time employee with a side gig, you will be a lot more secure in the future if you have a way to make money that's not just tied to your employer, who might be negatively affected by these things going on. So you need to have a self-employment backstop. Some of our most affluent clients over the years were the double dippers or the side gig people who were able to create extra source of income using their skills and their talents on the side. So I want you to prepare for inflation, prepare to have another source of income. And if you need help, I know that a lot of you are wondering ways to make money nowadays. We have a great helpful list that we will get to you. If you'll email us or email questions, we'll be happy to answer your questions for you. But we have a checklist on the great side gigs and outside sources of income that you can make to supplement your income now and fill in the holes that might be created by either company cutbacks, cutting you from 40 hours a week to 30 hours a week, cutting your Social Security. These things may happen, but don't be afraid. As Teddy Roosevelt said, when you have a challenge, take action. Take action today in 2025 to prepare for 2028. So the country might be going broke, but we don't want you to go broke. So protecting yourself against the disasters or potential problems in the economy is just part of the art of being smart.